Hello, good evening, and welcome to Prague Chattery 777. Well, we're talking about Jethro Tull, and we've made it all the way to 1980. This is A. Yeah, definitely a big moment in the story of Tull. It's famous as the first album released after the big split. And as such, there's a lot of history behind this album. So bear with me. I'm gonna try and get as much of it covered as I can. Originally, this was supposed to be an Ian Anderson solo record. This was supposed to be his solo debut. But record company pressures, he was basically forced to release it under the name Jethro Tull. And so, subsequently, the musicians that played on his solo record effectively became the members of Jethro Tull, which is a great shame because it meant that the older band, the classic 70s lineup, they all lost their jobs basically. they lost their position in Tull. Marten was fortunate enough, he was lucky enough to be retained because he played on Anderson's solo record. Also, Dave Pegg, he was retained. He was on the Stormwatch tour. He was hired to replace the deceased John Glasscock. So I mean, he had a tour's worth of experience in Tull. But I mean, like I said, it's such a shame that the big split happened because we had John Evan was a part of the band. He'd been there since 1970, since Benefit, and he was an old friend of Ian Anderson's. I mean, he was in the original incarnations of Tull before this was. And Barry Barlow, who was also a friend of Ian Anderson's from the early days in Blackpool, he was a part of Tull since Thick as a Brick. Although there's been interviews where I think Barlow states that he was kind of ready for it. It was going to end anyway. I guess like Stormwatch was not at all. That tour was not necessarily a happy tour. I get that feeling anyway. And also notable is David Palmer. David Palmer had like literally every Tull album up to this point had at least one track where David Palmer had done a string arrangement or horn arrangement or something. So that was kind of a key, a quintessential Jethro Tull element were those string arrangements. And because he was a member of the band, when this album came out and the solo musicians became Jethro Tull, he lost the job too. So this is the first Jethro Tull album that does not feature those exquisite string arrangements by David Palmer. So all of this stuff is ultimately a shame. What about the actual album itself? Well, the album itself is actually really, really good. I really like A, to be honest with you. It is my least favorite title of a Jethro Tull album, and it's also my least favorite album cover. I think it's a very tacky album cover, if you ask me. But the music on it is quite fresh, and obviously it's the beginning of the electronic period, the synthesizer-dominated period of Jethro Tull, which has obviously generated a lot of controversy. A lot of people aren't a big fan of that. But, Anderson was writing a solo album, and he was looking to do something that he hadn't done before. He wanted to do something that was distinctly not Tull. And as such, if you listen to A in sequence, I mean, it's such a drastic jump from what they'd been doing before. This is coming right off the heels of the Folk trilogy. And it's got to be the most drastic stylistic change the band had ever gone through, at least since Stand Up, because, let's remember, Stand Up is a huge change from the debut. So, it's that level of, 180 degree turnaround. But like I said, I really like the music on it. I think it's really fresh. So, yeah, we'll talk about the members real quick. Obviously, I mentioned Ian Anderson, of course. He was supposed to be a solo record. Marten on guitar still. Dave Pegg on bass from the Stormwatch tour. Mark Craney is brought in as the new drummer. A little bit simpler. He's not quite Barry Barlow, but, he has some great moments on here. It might just be the fact that, the 70s band had been playing together so long, they got so tight, whereas, these guys were initially session musicians that became a band. And also, Eddie Jobson is the other very notable character. He's the guy standing right there. The electric violinist and keyboards. I mean, he was the first keyboardist in the electronic synthy era of Tull. And obviously he was very famous at the time, and still is today, I think, in the prog circles. He had a stint with Frank Zappa. He had just come out of, off the heels of UK, which was a really, really cool band I might talk about one day. So yeah, he's certainly a cool figure, an interesting character, and he did some great stuff on here. So let's talk about the tracks. Side 1 opens with Crossfire. I think it's a really good song. We get I love the little orchestrations. The very intro is a great Eddie Jobson moment. A great little funky bass line. It's nothing too crazy. It's a kind of a 80s synth rock kind of a song. But it's like I said, it's quite funky, and there's some great little embellishments there. I love the flute playing in the chorus. Great stuff. Then we get track 2, Fylingdale Flyer. Might be my favorite on the album, actually. I really like Fylingdale Flyer. Quite a complex arrangement. There's some weird time signatures in there. The first verse is very sparse, and we get these kind of crazy piano jabs in there from Jobson. But I mean, the song itself is really good. Great melody, great vocal melody. And I love the flute line that comes in after the chorus. That din 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 din. And it's got there's some weird timings going on in there, especially with the bass. The bass line's got some very odd bits, and Mark Craney kind of bounces off those rhythms really well. So yeah, possibly it might be my contender for favorite song on the album. Track 3, Working John, Working Joe. It might be the one that I've got reservations on the album. I think it might be a bit too long. I'm not a huge fan of the riff, it might be a bit repetitive too, but it's okay. It is what it is. Track 4, which closes off side 1, is Black Sunday. I think this is probably the most famous song off this album, and it's really, really good. Probably the closest thing we get to an epic. Even though it's kind of got the same melody, it still has a lot of sections to it. It starts out with a real nice atmospheric, synthy opening, and then it's a really high energy, fast-paced number and frantic flute line, and the verses are quite a spoonful of words. I mean, there's a lot of words in the song that Anderson just but the melody is really, really strong. Like I said, it's multi-sectional. Even though it's basically working with the same melody, variations of the same melody, we get that nice slow section in the middle, and then the synthiness builds back up. It's really good. Black Sunday is okay with me. We flip the record over. We get side 2, and opens with Protect and Survive. This is an interesting one, because I'm quite certain Anderson has played this melody on a few occasions in recent years. Like the flute melody, not the song. The actual song bit is quite typical of the synthy period. And it's a pretty good song. It's okay. But the melody is where it's at. The melody is the flute melody, the main. I'm trying to think how it goes right now. It is quite cool. Yeah, that's the part. And I think that's the part that he's done again in recent years, but not the actual song. But it's still good. Typical of the period. Then the next song of side 2, track 2 of side 2, Batteries Not Included. Another contender for favorite song for me. I really, really like this one. We got a guest vocalist. I think it's Ian Anderson's son, who is very young at the time. Gets to complain about there not being batteries in his toy. But really frantic arrangement. Again, there's some really weird time signatures going in there. But I love those verses. I love the urgency of the verses. 6 o'clock in the morning. And I like it. It's a great song. It's a great example of a fast-paced, complex, tricky song that's still got loads of immediate listenable entertainment value. I think. Really, really cool song, and unique in the catalog, even for the '80s period. Then the third song of side 2 is Uniform. This is Eddie Jobson's big violin showcase. He gets to do the electric violin, does a great solo. It's fantastic. and just a great performance in general. It's all arranged violin, but that's kind of what we got as a there's no string arrangements. Like violin was not a new thing in Tull, but it's not in the form of a string arrangement by David Palmer. This is just Eddie Jobson, putting together, contributing some cool lines and arranging it into the song. Then it's a pretty high energy, fast paced rocker. It's good. Track 4, side 2 might be my guilty pleasure. I actually really like Four Wheel Drive. Low ratio. It's I guess it's kind of it seems it's knuckleheaded too. Is that not the right word? We get this really sludgy shuffle rhythm by Mark Craney, which is really really good, and this kind of exaggerated bluesy riff. It seems like it ought to be satirical, but I'm not sure if it is. Maybe it is. I love the flute line that goes over that bluesy riff. That pretty cool. I love the syncopation of that rhythm. And yeah, it's got a really strong chorus. Again, it's Ian Anderson, writing at his best, and there's some great melodies there. And track 5 of side 2 is the Pine Marten's Jig. Instrumental, and probably the closest thing you're going to get to any classic Tull sound. We get the kind of Celtic flute melody that leads the piece, and again, it's very complex and very well arranged. There's a lot of wild bits to it, and we also get a phenomenal guitar solo courtesy of Marten Barre. I haven't talked enough about Marten Barre's guitar playing, but he's a tremendous guitar player, not just for Tull. I mean, he's obviously the perfect guitar player for Tull. But I mean, just in general, he's a phenomenal guitarist. And there's some great interplay between the guitar solo and the flute solo in that middle section of Pine Marten's Jig. Goes back into the Celtic melody, and the highlight of the album for sure. I think it's been underplayed. I think Anderson should probably play it a little bit more because it's kind of a forgotten gem. And then the album winds up with "And Further On." Very very mellow. I mean, generally the album is quite high energy, fast paced. Synthesizer influenced rockers, and Further On closes the album on a nice soft note, but it wraps things up really really nice, and it's almost very meditative, and again there's a lot of synthesizer tones, and it's very synthy. It's again typical of that 80s period, but I think it's really good. I think it closes the album really really nicely. And yeah, I've got great memories of being really into the 80s albums. My parents were on vacation one week, and there was one night where I stayed up till like 4 in the morning going through all the 80s Tull. And I think it's really overlooked. I mean, obviously there's some production issues with some of it. Not even issues. It just sounds dated. It sounds like a product of its time. But this one less so than Under Wraps, for example. Although I think Under Wraps is a better album than this. We'll find out about that soon enough. But yeah, I mean, aside from the production sounding dated, I think this period of Tull should be reevaluated a little bit more, because it's a really fruitful period for Ian Anderson's songwriting. He was writing some great material at the time, and it should not be overlooked. I think these are really good albums, and even though there's kind of a sad story behind the creation of this album, at the end of the day, it's a really good album, and you should check it out. So there it is, A by Jethro Tull. We're making our way further into the 80s. Stay tuned next time when I discuss the Broadsword and the Beast. So that'll be good fun. We'll see you then, eh? Cheers.